Hello, and thank you for watching this screencast presentation. I'm Randy Stafford. I'm the product manager for Coherence at Oracle, and I would like to present an overview of Coherence 14.1.1.2206 feature pack patch to Oracle Coherence. I have a few topics in this presentation. First, I'd like to just go over a little bit of context that'll help understand what the 2206 feature pack patch is. Then I'll talk about the most recent release of Coherence Community Edition, that's release 2206. And then I'll go into what is contained in Oracle Coherence 14.1.1.2206 feature pack. And I'll close with just a few teasers about upcoming releases of Coherence. So with that, let's jump in. For context, Oracle Coherence release 14.1.1 became available in March of 2020, so about almost 2.5 years ago. And then in June of 2020, we launched Coherence Community Edition, which is an open source edition of Coherence. We did this to provide early access to upcoming features in Oracle Coherence. And our Community Edition software has a 6-month release cadence. We were making releases in June and December of each year, hence the numbers like 2206. And most of these releases were non-long-term support. The graph on the right here just shows the number of downloads of Coherence Community Edition by month over the last year, and the trend shows 4x growth year over year in the number of downloads, and the same trend held true for the previous year before the one shown here. Well, we wanted to bring Community Edition features and the value of the work that we've done in Community Edition into the commercial Oracle Coherence editions, Enterprise and Grid Edition. We have 2 years worth of feature development that was released in Community Edition to bring into the commercial editions. So that's what the 14.1.1.2206 feature pack is. It's a patch to Oracle Coherence, which brings in all the features that have been released in Community Edition since it was launched in June 2020. It allows the use of these new features from Community Edition together with the premium features that are in commercial editions. For example, in Oracle Coherence Grid Edition, we have federated caching for multi-site architecture. We have Golden Gate Hot Cache for change data capture. And in Oracle Coherence Enterprise Edition, we have managed coherence servers, the integration with WebLogic. And we also have Coherence Web for managing HTTP session state. So now, with the 14.1.1.2206 feature pack patch, you can use those premium features together with all of the new features that were released in Community Edition over the last 2 years. The lifetime support policy for the 14.1.1.2206 feature pack patch is the Oracle Fusion middleware lifetime support policy. So the lifetime of this patch will be covered by that policy. And Community Edition 2206 is the first long-term support Community Edition release. It has a 4-year support lifetime. So that's the context. And now let me describe Community Edition release 2206. I've put in the subtitle here a link to the Medium story announcing this release. This release actually became available on June 29th. We published its artifacts to Maven Central. It was primarily a hardening release of Community Edition since we knew that it would have a 4-year support lifetime. But there's actually a really nice set of valuable enhancements in this release as well. First of all, Java modules support so that you can run Coherence using Java modules if you're developing a modular Java application. Persistent backups stores backup partitions on disk in addition to primary partitions if you're using Coherence's persistence feature, which gives you high availability of persistent data. We've introduced a health check API so that application code and HTTP clients can check on the health of a local Coherence member. We've added some new reports to our JMX-based reporting, metrics reporting capability for executors, for view caches, for storage, and for proxy connections. And we've added some member joined and member left events for extend clients. So if you need to do any resource cleanup when an extend client disconnects, you can catch an event and do that. We've added support for locks and semaphores from our Coherence concurrent project to extend clients. So Coherence extend clients can now use locks and semaphores from the Coherence concurrent project. And we've done a number of hardening improvements to our topics messaging feature. We've actually incorporated an open source contribution of Caffeine as a backing map implementation. Caffeine's a map implementation with sophisticated expiry policies and eviction policies, and you can now configure a Caffeine backing map from this open source contribution. And we've done a number of configuration and customization improvements to our SSL capabilities to basically harden up the security of the product even more. So Community Edition 2206 supports both Java 11 and Java 17. And now let me talk about the Oracle Coherence 14.1.1.2206 feature pack. I've got a link again to the official Coherence blog entry announcing this patch. This was released on July 26th. It's a patch to Oracle Coherence 14.1.1, patch number 34372869 on My Oracle support. You apply this patch to a 14.1.1.0.0 Oracle home containing Oracle Coherence. And this 14.1.1.2206 feature pack is certified with Java 11. We've dropped support for Java 8 in this patch. And this patch brings 2 years and 5 releases worth of Community Edition features into Oracle Coherence Enterprise and Grid editions, the commercial editions. And I'll go into more detail on those features. This patch enjoys Premier support through March 2025 and extended support through March 2028 per the Fusion Middleware lifetime support policy. So on a timeline view, when you look at Coherence releases over the last 2 years, starting with calendar 2020, the red boxes here are commercial product releases. The green boxes are open source project releases. We've done a lot of work in open source recently. So as I mentioned, March 2020, we released Coherence 14.1.1. It had a number of major new features: the topics messaging system, an implementation of open tracing for distributed tracing, integration with GraalVM for polyglot grid side programming on GraalVM, and support for JDK 11. Then in June 2020, we launched the open source community edition. The first release of it was 20.06. We added a new proxy server based on gRPC, which is now preferred to Coherence Extend, and all of our new native language clients are written to use the gRPC proxy server. And we added support for Helidon microprofile, integration with Helidon Microservices framework. In fact, we introduced a demo application called Helidon Sock Shop, which shows off that integration of Coherence and Helidon, and Sock Shop is an open source project on GitHub. Later in the year, we introduced a JavaScript native language client that uses our gRPC proxy. We revved our .NET client. We revved our Kubernetes operator for Coherence called Coherence Operator to version 3. And we revved our Hibernate integration to support latest versions of Hibernate. Then in December, we made our Community Edition 20.12 release, which features a new API called the Bootstrap API for bootstrapping a Coherence client or Coherence server from application code in a consistent, simple way. We added a GraphQL interface, which is very powerful, allows you to obtain projections of data contained in Coherence with one HTTP round trip, even if the data in the projection comes from objects in different caches. It can do cross-cache navigation. We introduced support for micrometer metrics, and we parallelized the recovery of data in our persistence feature so that recovery is much faster. We parallelized both across the grid and within a given cluster member. We also added updated plugins for Visual VM and a couple of IDEs like Eclipse and IntelliJ. And we launched another demo app called the To-Do List, which is a very familiar problem domain. Everybody knows what a to-do list is. This particular demo app, which is also open source, shows off a number of our different clients, including REST and different native language clients. Then in let me go into detail on a couple of these features that have to do with microservices. So the integration of Coherence and Helidon MicroProfile, which was released in Community Edition 2206, allows you to bootstrap Coherence into Helidon MicroProfile apps using context and dependency injection, so that when a Helidon JVM comes up and is ready to serve microservice requests, Coherence is already bootstrapped in that JVM, and Coherence objects like caches are injected into Helidon services. And in this case, Helidon is the main class that the JVM is launched on. Coherence is just a library. So obviously, we support context and dependency injection in this integration. You can inject Coherence resources like named maps into Helidon services. You can inject CDI managed objects like event interceptors and cache stores into Coherence. And you can use CDI observers to handle Coherence events. We integrated our metrics with Helidon so that all of our JMX metrics are available as a standard Helidon microprofile metrics endpoint. We implemented the configuration service so that Coherence can be configured using microprofile configuration, or Coherence can be used as a microprofile configuration source. And finally, we integrated our distributed tracing with Helidon MicroProfile so that our spans can automatically be included in larger duration Helidon spans. So that's a little bit about the Coherence and Helidon integration. And I already touched on this SockShop demo. We took a well-known microservices demo app called SockShop and we re-implemented it to use Coherence and Helidon in place of MongoDB and MySQL and RabbitMQ and Spring Boot and GoKit. And in the process of doing that, we obtained a lot of simplification benefits, replacing a half a dozen dependencies with just two, and the code for interacting with those frameworks and persistence technologies is simpler. We also achieved scalability benefits just due to the inherent scalability of Coherence. And this SockShop demo app is open source on GitHub, so you can look at it and see how to build a microservices application with Helidon and Coherence. Now, when you look at what we released in Community Edition in calendar 2021, there was quite a bit. We revved our Kubernetes operator to support ARM64 and to work with Istio. We also made a patch to Community Edition release 20.12, and this patch introduced portable types, which is a significant improvement to our portable object format serialization framework, which eliminates the need for POF configuration XML files at runtime. Now it's all annotation driven, and we have IDE plugins that auto-generate POF serialization code from the annotations. We made our 2106 release in June of Community Edition, and we introduced a repository API. If you're familiar with domain-driven design, you know that repository is a pattern that basically abstracts access to data. A repository stands for the collection of all entities of a given type, and it typically implements CRUD type of behavior. Our implementation has advanced features like support for projections, support for querying with indexes, support for events and pagination. And we introduced a feature called durable events, which allows a Coherence extend client to request the replay of events that occurred in the grid while that client was disconnected. So when the client reconnects, it can replay events that happened and not miss those events. We introduced non-blocking entry stores, which were foundational to our Kafka integration that I'll talk about a little bit later. And we introduced an updated plugin for Visual VM. Then we did a number of very significant integrations We integrated Coherence with Micronaut, which is another microservices framework, which has some familiar notions like a data framework. So we support Micronaut data with Coherence, a messaging framework, a caching abstraction, so Coherence can be used for arbitrary Micronaut caching, and a session framework, so Coherence can store sessions. And we did the usual dependency injection and event listening type of integration points there. We made a major overhaul of our Spring integration, where we basically expanded it tremendously and updated some of our other implementations. So we now support Spring Boot with Coherence. And when you're using a Spring Boot app, Coherence can be automatically bootstrapped into that Spring Boot app. You can use Coherence as the backing layer behind Spring Data, as the backing layer behind the Spring Cache abstraction and behind Spring Session. And we also released a number of example applications that show this integration. Then in December of last year, we released Community Edition 21.12, which contained a major new project called Coherence Concurrent. It's a Coherence-backed implementation of the Java util concurrent packages or certain types in those packages, so that you can use, for example, executors in the grid for scheduling work. You can use locks and semaphores in the grid for distributed process coordination. And we did a number of performance optimizations, including allowing Coherence to read data from the backup copy if so configured, in case the backup copy is closer to the client than the primary copy. And we did a number of hardening fixes on our messaging implementation called topics. So that was all in calendar 21. And then detail on the Micronaut integration, I already described a little bit. You can dependency inject Coherence objects into Micronaut microservices. You can add Micronaut listeners for Coherence events. You can have Coherence backing Micronaut data. Micronaut messaging integrates with Coherence topics. You can have Coherence backing Micronaut cache abstraction and backing Micronaut sessions. So the goal here was just to make it easy for Micronaut microservices users to use Coherence for data management. And this integration is an open source project. There's a Medium story describing it in more detail. Already mentioned the Spring integration, a major piece of work, probably 2 or 3 man-years went into this project, a major reboot and expansion of our Spring integration, automatic configuration of Coherence in Spring Boot apps, including dependency injection and annotation-driven event listeners. The Spring data support uses the repository API I mentioned with advanced features like projection and pagination. We support the Spring cache abstraction with Coherence now, and we support Spring JPA repository from new implementations of the JPA cache loader and cache store that are part of Coherence's data source integration capabilities. We support Spring Session. We have annotation-driven topics publishers and listeners using Coherence's topics messaging system, and we can automatically configure micrometer metrics. And we actually have a number of Medium articles on this integration that go into great detail. So then in calendar 2022, early this year, we launched a new command line interface for managing Coherence, which is very cool. It's similar to kubectl. It's called coctl, and it allows you to discover Coherence clusters and set a given Coherence cluster into context of the command line interface, then observe that cluster and even manage that cluster to some extent. It's scriptable. It has configurable output formats, including JSON. Very cool tool for people who prefer command line interfaces. We revved our Visual VM plugin. We implemented Kafka integration. I've got a detailed slide on that. And we revved our Hibernate and Spring integrations. Then, of course, we came to our 2206 release, which I described earlier, has a number of valuable enhancements, even though it's a hardening release. And now we have launched Oracle Coherence 14.1.1.2206 feature pack, which is a patch to commercial Coherence editions, Oracle Coherence Enterprise and Grid editions, which brings in all of the features that I just went through together with the premium features so that they can be used together in a single Coherence installation. And all of the open source projects that I went through here are compatible with Oracle Coherence 14.1.1.2206. So it's really a significant patch with a lot of functionality in it. Just a quick summary on the Kafka integration. Coherence can act as a Kafka source or a Kafka sink, so that on this in the source scenario, this is the upper half of the diagram. If you put a key value pair into Coherence, we will call a Kafka entry store, which will produce a record into a Kafka cluster. And on the sink side, the bottom half of the diagram here, we have a Coherence sync connector for Kafka that can take a record from Kafka and basically put it into Coherence as a key value pair. So this is an important integration for people who are building modern streaming-based architectures in addition to microservices architectures, the ability to integrate natively with Kafka. Okay, so let me close with just a couple of teasers about upcoming releases. Our next release of Coherence Community Edition will be 2209 in September of this year. This release will support Jakarta EE9, which means it will import and depend on Jakarta.star packages instead of javax.star packages. This 2209 release will integrate with Helidon 3.0, which also supports Jakarta EE9 and which requires Java 17. And it will also be a long-term support release. So just like Community Edition 2206, 2209 will be a long-term support release. And then in March of 2023, we will release Community Edition 2303. We are changing the timing of the Community Edition releases to be in March and September of each year, whereas previously it was in June and December of each year. 2303 will be a non-long-term support but feature-bearing release, and sometime in the future we'll have another commercial Oracle Coherence release like 14.1.2, which will incorporate all the features released in Community Edition since 2206, and we may have another feature pack patch in the future as well to bring Community Edition features into commercial Oracle Coherence. So thank you again. That was an overview of Oracle Coherence 2206 feature pack, and we hope that you will apply it to your commercial Oracle installations and use all the powerful features in it together with the premium features. Thank you very much.